highway haunting in Georgia. I remember when that first headlined in the newspapers. But I'd like to introduce Mark Trubel for his fifth speech, Your Body Speaks.
Good afternoon. Well, good morning still. I'm not going to keep up with the accent because there's no way I could get through the whole speech without it. Want you all to see? No notes. We'll see how far we get. In 1985, I was a young, strong infantryman stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia, which is about a 40-minute drive southwest of Savannah. Being a young, strong, 21-year-old man at that time, like many others, I loved the heavy metal band Dio, which was led by and named for one of my all-time favorite rock and roll singers, the legendary super elf himself, Ronnie James Dio. On September 28th of that year, Dio was set to perform at the old Omni Coliseum in Atlanta, which is about 240 miles away from Fort Stewart. Since that day landed on a Saturday, and since I was a young, strong, 21-year-old infantryman, I thought there was no way I was going to miss this show. Even though it meant a 4-hour drive each way, I somehow managed to convince my Army buddy, Ed Windebank, and a girl friend of ours, we'll call her Jessica, because I just don't remember her name, to go with me to the concert. The drive to Atlanta was long, boring, and uneventful. But the concert, the Dio show, now that was freaking awesome. Ronnie James was in his prime. And I'll always remember the climax of the show, when right there on the stage, he slew a giant fire-breathing dragon with this huge, laser-lit, two-handed sword. After a long encore set, the house lights came up, and I glanced at my watch. Is that 11 o'clock? By the time we made it back to my car, it was almost midnight, and we still had that long, boring, 4-hour drive ahead of us. I hate to admit it, but it's been decades since I last drove in southern Georgia. But back in the 80s, there were long sections of interstate highway that wound through densely wooded forests. On a cloudy night on these long, dark sections of road, the darkness was so thick, it was like a weight pressing down on the brightness of your headlamps as you drove. It was on just such a night, at 2 a.m., halfway on our trek back to Fort Stewart, that we found ourselves traveling on one of these lonely black stretches of road. I was driving like I always do. Ed was in the passenger seat like he always was, helping to keep me awake. And Jessica, or whatever her name was in the back seat fast asleep. That's when I noticed a weak flash of light in my rearview mirror. I looked up, I saw a set of headlamps in the murky distance. As we went around a natural bend in the road, the dark forest cut off our view of the headlights. A few minutes later, I looked up into my rearview mirror again. The headlights were back. Obviously, the car following us had come around the bend as well. Being as late as it was, I decided to keep tabs on the car behind us, just to pass some of the time. At first, everything was fine, but then I noticed every time we went around a bend or over a hill, it seemed to take an unusually long amount of time for those headlights to shine out again in my rearview mirror. It seemed like the car would disappear, and then a few minutes later, it would reappear out of nowhere, always while I was looking ahead. And the weirdest part about it was that it seemed to always be the same distance away, never further back, never closer. So I mentioned this to Ed, and he turned around and looked out the back window as we went around another bend. Just like I thought, the dark forest cut off our view of the headlights. And we waited for that car to come around the bend. And we waited, for that car to come around the bend. Nothing. We waited for a few more minutes, still nothing. At this point, because this is Toastmasters, we exchanged a few choice words. I won't say them. But we decided to wake up Jessica. Of course, after we explained to her what we had seen, she didn't believe us. But then we went over another hill, in the darkness, in the heavy pressing darkness. And the same thing happened. The landscape cut off our view of the lights, and nothing, they just disappeared. They wouldn't come back. Well, it's 3 a.m., we're now all wide awake. We don't know what's going on. If somebody's messing with our heads, well, I have to say it was sure working. So after another 5 minutes go by, we're driving again, and we seem to be the only people on the road once more. Nobody in sight, no headlights, no street lights, no exits, nothing but dark, big forest on either side. Well, we go around another bend. I look into my rearview mirror, and what do you think I saw? Those darn cursed headlights had appeared again, coming around the bend, pretty as you please, just as if that car had always been there. That's it, I yelled. I stepped on the brakes. I pulled out to the side of the road and skidded to a stop. We sat there in the oppressive darkness, waiting for what would happen next. We watched as the headlights came closer. We watched as the headlights slowed down. We watched as they pulled off to the side of the road coming close behind us. We watched, and they vanished. We sat there stunned for a moment. Then I threw open my car door and practically jumped out of the car. Jessica cried out for me to stop, but I ran out behind the car back to where I knew that vehicle following us was. Ready for anything, except for what I found. There was no sign of any car of any kind anywhere behind us. Ooh. Needless to say, the last leg of our trip was pretty silent. It's hard to say what we saw that night. Maybe it was a mass hallucination brought on by the Dio concert, made worse by sleep deprivation. The only thing I can say for certain is that back in 1985, I was a young, strong infantryman stationed at Fort Stewart who loved Ronnie James Dio. And to this day, I still get goosebumps whenever I tell this story. Thanks.